If you're listening on podcast, be sure to tune into Wild and Weird West Virginia for additional content on our YouTube channel.
Welcome to Wild and Weird Radio, a Wild and Weird West Virginia podcast. Welcome back to Wild and Weird Radio, everybody. Happy 2023. We're glad to have you all listening and hanging out with us again. And we've got a, man, we're not starting the year off easy. We're just going to start it there. So before we go any further, remember, if you're listening to us on podcast, go check out the YouTube, especially with this series of episodes, which is what this is going to turn out being, because we're going to be putting up pictures and links and
Lots of data, lots of data
for you to actually pause and read. So you're definitely going to want to head over to the YouTube, take a look at that stuff, and while you're over there, go ahead and just give us a like and a subscribe. That'd be fantastic. We'd really appreciate it. Speaking of likes and subscribes over on YouTube, we've got our last winner until we breach 1,000 subscribers, and that was Sarah Moore. Thanks, Sarah Moore, for hanging out with us and listening to us every week and watching the YouTube. You were the winner, and when I got your address, I was shocked because I actually used to go fishing out where you live all the time. I grew up not too far from you. To go ahead and we're skipping the news. We're skipping the news.
Oh, we might be skipping the news for the next 3 weeks.
I think the next 3 weeks we're skipping
unless something really major occurs. And it's really why we wanted to do this, in case something really major did occur on this front, right?
Yeah, because this is going to be a series of episodes that you're going to be listening to. There's a lot of information here because this is something that's been going on for years. We've been tracking the data. We're going to be referencing a lot of old episodes where you're going to be able to link things in together with these 3 episodes, at least 3. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about some of our own observations and what prompted us to begin looking into these possible links and how it seems that others are beginning to arrive at the same conclusion publicly. We're talking about the evidence that's coming down from the Hill, the stuff that's coming from Capitol Hill, all the UFO reports, the data that is slowly trickle feeding out. We're hearing news of big rumored I don't know if it would call it earth shattering or groundbreaking, but
paradigm shifting
news. Yeah, I'll go with that. Yeah, paradigm shifting, that sounds good. News breaks that are going to change the way that we perceive things.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a report fall in our lap the day after we recorded last week's episode. And that's really what just said, okay, we've got to do this, and we've got to be the ones jumping on it right now, because this is something that we've been talking about for a very long time, and it's time to show you where we've put all the pieces together.
Well, it was actually last year when I contacted you after we had seen some of the stuff that was coming down from the whole, disclosure, I guess, of the ALSAP program and so forth. And I believe it was after the release of Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. and George Knapp was on several programs talking about some stuff, and I thought, hmm, that's interesting,
Yeah.
And then I believe that we had already started to come to a conclusion that something was going on, and then we got the call about what Eric and the guys had seen. That's also referenced in the other episode that we did earlier last year. Actually, it was later last year. But what we found out was that there's overwhelming um, sightings of these orb type things. I mean, even Jesse and Joe had reported, they had seen orbs
Yep.
out there. She had talked about that multiple times, and they're still out there chasing these things around. But here's the thing: I don't know, and I told you at the time, I don't know that the right thing to do is to chase them.
Yeah, it's very troubling, especially with some of the data that we've been seeing coming from Dr. Travis.
Well,
You know,
it's based on what they were saying on Skinwalker, the Mystery Skinwalker Ranch, and then when Gary Nolan came forward and started talking about some of the actual things that he had been
yeah.
involved in, and then when I did a lot more research on Nolan to find out that this is true.
Well, in case you guys haven't listened to any of the past episodes where we covered Dr. Nolan, just to give you some backdrop on him, he's an immunologist, and he's the resident immunologist at Stanford University. The guy's got over 40 patents to his name, and he claimed to be involved in studying the after effects of exposure to UAP phenomena.
Right.
And that threw up a lot of red flags.
Right. And it threw up a lot with us.
Right.
Because go ahead. You know why.
We threw up a lot of red flags for us was because this was after the fact that we had already been recording these higher than average radiation levels in these areas where these balls of light were being seen or reportedly being seen in the past.
Or dare you say it, Bigfoot activity.
Yeah, some Bigfoot activity. Not all.
Not all. No, not all. But in some of our research areas, we started to notice that.
In some of our research areas, we did start noticing these elevated radiation levels. We did everything we could to try to find out anything with the USGS to see if there was uranium deposits somewhere here that weren't widely known, or if there was some kind of like landfills that might be containing some sort of radioactive materials that would be giving off residual readings. However, when we'd go back to these areas again in a different and later time, we wouldn't collect data at all.
No, it's a transient event is what it is.
Exactly.
It's a transient event that occurs in a location. It doesn't mean that it doesn't occur in that location. It means that it moves around that location, is from what I can tell.
So when we heard about Dr. Nolan coming out and talking about his involvement with the program, it kind of took us by surprise. And his work actually validated a Defense Intelligence reference document that was released by the Black Vault.
Yeah.
And
we covered that, but we'll cover it again tonight way in depth.
Yes.
For those who don't really understand what we're trying to say, we're going to go over everything. Like this is going to be more than just a briefing document. This is not going to be one of those read throughs. This is going to be a very, very slow,
methodical
briefing. Yeah, very methodical. And we're going to talk about some of the things, like I said, that led us to this. But what had happened was essentially I called Joe and I said, Joe, I don't think that we should be going out there unless we have some form of radiation detection going on at all times at this point, just in case. And I said, I'm not ready to really, say that publicly because there's not, it's just kind of like.
But everybody in our inner circle, we alerted them to that.
Yeah, we did.
So, like you said, we didn't go public with it.
Yeah.
But all of the research teams that we're affiliated with and that we work with, we did give them the recommendation.
And we told them to gather data. And of course, they gathered data. There's been data gathered on the Chestnut Ridge. There's been data gathered around here. There's been other data gathered. And apparently there's been data gathered at top levels of this phenomena that we're just now starting to be privy to. So without, I guess, further ado, shall we go into the whole history of this? Because man, is it a roller coaster ride, and the
Yeah.
amount of
So,
players.
folks, buckle up, because this is going to be one that you're going to have to pause and digest from time to time, and even go back and make sure you actually heard what you heard us say, because we will be reading from official documents.
We'll have links to all those too.
And
You can
links to all of that.
Look at the links for yourself.
And it is wow. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
like Ron said, go follow the links for yourself. We're not painting a picture here. We're just presenting the data.
Yeah, this is just the data, and it's really more, if you're interested in it, wonderful. If you are a researcher, I'm not telling you to go out and, protect yourself from, these waves and radiation. I'm telling you that it would probably be an okay idea to be just as precautious as you would be going under, say, a high voltage power line. I mean, I wouldn't want to camp out there either. So,
right.
But that being said, let's go back and let's start off this crazy thing because it really started. I mean, some could argue it started, thousands of years ago, right, Joe?
Yeah, they could.
But we're not going to go there. Well, this is not an ancient aliens episode. This is a modern event type episode. So we're gonna take it from where modern ufology kind of began. We know that after the first sightings in 47, so forth and so on. We know that they had these research programs that started up, which were mostly to really debunk the phenomena at those days. We talked about that in an earlier episode. That's the history of ufology, or history of UFOs from the first year that we got on here. It's very extensive. But in the 1950s, there was an increase in UFO activity. It included 2 flyovers of Washington, D.C. in July of 1952. And according to Donald Kehoe, remember him from the previous episode as well. In 1952, more than 1,000 sightings were reported as spacecraft maneuvered over cities, airports, military bases, and particularly atomic energy centers. In the words of United States Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, aeronautical engineer, specialist in technical intelligence, and head of Project Blue Book,
which was the UFO investigation wing of the Air Force. Back in the day, prior to being Blue Book, it was Project Sign, then became Project Grudge, then we were given Blue Book.
That's right. And we know what Blue Book really was for, right?
Right.
I think we kind of figured that out at Grudge, though, with the name Grudge. But Project Sign, Joe, you remember Project Sign was, hey, this is something.
Yeah.
And then you're like, back off of this. But during a 6-month period in 1952 alone, 148 of the nation's leading newspapers, that's 148 newspapers back then, Joe, before the web, before the internet, during the snail mail of the slowest days, 148 of the nation's leading newspapers carried a total of 16,000 items about flying saucers.
This is 16,000 items spread across 148 newspapers.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody out there wants to do the math, give us that number and we'll maybe send you something. But according to Kehoe, these objects themselves are of 3 types. There are small, remotely controlled discs, large, presumably crude discs. When I say crude, I don't mean like CRUDE, but crude, like a disc containing a flight crew.
Yeah. The Enterprise.
And a really large cylindrical motherships, which would be the cigar-shaped craft. The UFOs could be secret devices from the United States or Russia, or merely natural phenomena. But Kehoe rules out all but interplanetary interpretation.
Now, I wanted to take us here on this little bit because this just happened again. And we know that it almost seems that this history is cyclical, isn't it? I mean, we have to look at it. Hey,
I'm just waiting for Grudge 2.0.
What? Right. Because that, according to this, that's what should happen next, right? If this is truly a cyclical event, then this is exactly what's going to happen. You're going to be, this could be aliens. No, it's not. Absolutely not. We're going to, these are weather balloons or whatever they're going to call them. Drones, I guess now, right, Joe? But anyway, So it's from the 1950s, in 1952 was where we leave this era. We go to 1966, and we have our first major player, and you're going to recognize his name because we've talked about him a lot in
Yeah.
previous episodes. In 1966, Joe McGonigal, on his first tour of duty on the Isle of El Thura in the Bahamas, with a colleague, Steve Roberts, witnessed a 300-foot UFO. It emitted a bright beam of light that turned night into day, according to him. The next day, he had trouble getting out of bed. He suffered from an extreme sunburn. His friend suffered even worse burns, though, and he was actually taken to the infirmary, and it produced scarring, and he suffered from light sensitivity for decades after. Now, you're going to say, what does that have to do with anything? Keep listening because,
Well, let's, we'll explain what a sunburn is.
yeah, let's explain what a sunburn is. How do you get a sunburn, Joe?
Sunburn is caused due to exposure to solar radiation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, other forms of radiation are going to leave you with effects similar to sunburn, depending on how extreme it is, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about a very brief encounter that left them both with sunburns, which in 1966, that's probably one of the best things they had to describe it at the time. Because we weren't exactly standing toe to toe out on the Trinity field.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, buddy.
The nuclear radiation blasts.
That's a good point.
But these guys they saw this craft that emitted a beam of light that turned night to day, and then they had sunburns.
Mm-hmm.
Those sunburns were caused by residual radiation
of some sort.
Of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
And caused light sensitivity for decades after, produced scarring that stayed permanently. I mean, this is pretty intense. You're talking what would be to produce scarring that stayed. You're talking about the equivalency of, at minimum, a second-degree burn.
Yeah. Yeah, you are. I mean, and we know today we know, and they probably knew back then, but now we know that, radiation in the microwave range can do that.
Yeah.
It's how we cook a potato, dude. In the microwave, right? I mean, it's the same thing. It gets bombarded by these waves, and the water inside heats up, and unless it's a frozen burrito, and by God, you cannot get the center of that thing to thaw to save your life.
And what is quite the opposite is a hot pocket, in which case the exterior will be still cool to the touch, but the interior will be as if it was the center of the earth.
Well,
molten magma
to me,
will set your face ablaze.
Yeah, it is one of the absolute biggest deceptions on the planet. Yeah. Anyway, back to the story. 1967 to 1968, we talked about this also. See how we're going
real
with
quick.
this?
1966 was what happened with Joe McGonigal. We are 1 year later.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, this is important to kind of follow these years because of the progression. There is definitely a clear line of progression that seems to emerge here. I mean, we might as well just put the big chalkboard behind me and start drawing lines and using,
eventually we're going to do this. We need to do this as an in-person presentation.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we really do. Just have a lot of little pictures and yarns and pins, push pins. Anyway, 1967, 1968, exactly like you said, a year later, the Maelstrom Air Force event happens, and we know what happened there. Basically, a great gigantic ball of light appears outside the gate, and the missiles shut off. And we talked about before, they didn't just shut off for a little bit; they were down for a day.
Right.
That was a very.
They were down, not just.
Oh yeah.
A little down. They were down.
They were down. They were offline. They could not be used. So, in the middle of the Cold War, someone learned how to shut off our most powerful weapons. It happens again and again and again.
And our most powerful defense.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. Yes, it is a defense more than it is an actual offensive weapon. It is a defensive weapon. That's its true purpose. In 1970, there was a Operation Plate which began. This was the Brazilian Air Force's investigation of the UFO flap of the Colares Island. Now, this is important because the key player who comes up in this is going to harken right back to a certain science fiction movie which will be made decades from this point. So 1970, Operation Plate. BASS, by the way. They were going to use a lot of these acronyms, so I'll tell you what BASS is. BAAS. So
That is
BASS,
BAASS.
right? And who's it from, Joe?
Well, this is going to be under the guidance of Mr. Bigelow, which is one of the biggest names in a lot of conspiracy circles because of the involvement with,
Weird stuff. Let's just say it. The man likes weird
Skinwalker
stuff.
Ranch, all of the stuff that went on there, as well as being independently able to fund these massive projects that were secret black projects.
Right.
And one of the ones we know about was BASS.
So BASS, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, also was in leagues with something called ALSAP. And, that's funny because a lot of people think that ATIP was the big thing because there's this misleading, you remember that article, right? The New York Times ran with, it wasn't ATIP, it was ALSAP that had that. ALSAP is the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. Now, they employed someone called Jacques Vallée. Boy, don't that sound familiar.
Anybody who has followed anything with ufology instantly had their ears perk up.
Yeah. So Jacques and the Brazilians set up a UFO task force. Now, remind you, this is before the UAP task force, which we would eventually set up. This was in the 70s. This was 1970. So they set up this task force, and it consisted of biologists, physicists, medical doctors, and chemists. They were to study the events in real time of these sightings that were occurring in this area. And Operations Plate ran for 3 months. It was a 3-month long field investigation. It included 500 photographs, 15 hours of motion film, as well as 1,000 pages of documents, logs, sketches, and maps. Now, none of these have really been released, by the way.
Yeah, we've not seen these. You got to remember, this is done by a foreign government. Although Brazil is an ally of ours, they're not sharing this kind of stuff with the public.
Right. But what was significant about this study was that a substantial number of disturbing medical injuries were reported and discovered during this event. Now, it gets interesting. In 1970, United States intelligence sources believed that the Soviet Union was spending 60 million rubles annually on psychotronic research. Joe, would you like to explain what psychotronic research is?
So psychotronic research is similar to, what the CIA was actually even doing here in the United States around the exact same time, which is training psychic abilities to be able to look where out-of-body experiences, out-of-body observation, being able to remote view, these kinds of spy projects, essentially, where your spy would never have to leave a room in your facility, but would be able to look or observe at any point across the globe.
Right. And their psychotronics weapons program went in so far that they were actually looking for what would basically be mutants. Okay. They were looking for people with extraordinary mental abilities that could actually manipulate materials, psychokinesis, pyrokinesis, telekinesis, anything that they could use as a weapons to basically weaponize the brain, the mind.
Yeah.
Against their adversaries, which would have been us at the time. And still is. But either way, I guess we got a hold of his information.
About 2 years later, publicly.
Publicly, yes. But at the same time that they were doing it, the CIA initiated funding for a new program that was called Scanate, or SCANATE, Scanate, however you want to say it. But basically, what this thing was a scan by coordinates kind of thing. What it turned into in 1972 was remote viewing.
Yeah.
And guess where it started? It started at Stanford Research Institute in Menlo
That's
Park, California.
SRI, which you guys have heard us talk about that quite a bit.
Yep. Uh, the proponents of this new program, my friend, Russell Targ and Harold Putoff.
Remember those names.
Yep,
You're gonna
they
hear
are
them
very
again.
important. And if you know about this stuff, you already just, your ears perked again. Of the researchers that said that a minimum accuracy of 65% required by the clients was often exceeded in the later experiments. In other words, they began to do these experiments and they found that they had a very high success rate that said that this stuff works. So they were at this point in the very early days trying to use psychic abilities, out of body experiences, Project Gateway. If anyone remembers that, it would be a good
And
time to go look that up.
and what this said in that little sentence there, but before going into these projects, that the minimum accuracy rate was 65%.
That's minimum.
That's what the average Joe had to be able to go in and execute before they could even go into the program. This wasn't a one-time 65%. They had to be consistent at 65% minimum to be able to go into the project further. And their results stated that the client was often able to exceed that 65% margin later in their experiments.
Mm-hmm. There were some serious stars in it, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit. Major Donald Kehoe in 1973, he wrote a book, and in his book, Aliens from Space, he proposed something in that book, Joe, that was
He
called
did.
Operation Lure. Now, I have tried to find as much as I can about Operation Lure. No, no, it's not. You can Google it all you want. It's not going to really come up. I found it in a couple of things, but basically, a few years later, after reading that little part from the book Operation Lure, uh, Vallée, Dr. Jacques Vallée again, begins to talk about his desire to interfere with the hypothesized meta control system behind the phenomena to expose its true nature. See, Vallée believed that there was a mask involved with this phenomena, that it was a trick, and he still does, that it was a trickster type phenomena. That was his thing. Um, Passport to Magonia detailed that very well.
Yeah.
Actually. And basically saying that this thing wears many faces. And we were trying to figure out what it was. So fast forward to 1977. You want to do this one?
Yeah, the security police responded to an all call from the launch control officers at Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. This was concerning a giant UFO over the base. At the time, Ellsworth Air Force Base and had played a crucial role in the Northern Tier defense system, housing several hundred Minutemen intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's ICBMs for anybody who's familiar. Both security officers reported strange occurrences, such as several hours of missing time, as well as strange sunburns.
Yeah. So once again, we have this flyover of one of our strategic locations. Again, this time housing several hundred Minuteman missiles. That is a lot of nukes, is what that is in 1977.
It's terrifying.
It is. It is absolutely. And
that was the bulk at the time. That was the bulk of our ICBM property.
It was the Northern Tier defense. So yeah, I mean that's a lot.
Yeah.
So something again shows up, and it's what's it doing? It's creating light. The light is causing these strange sunburns again. There's missing time involved. This is starting to look familiar. It's starting to sound a little bit more familiar now that we know what this stuff kind of is, right?
Right. It harkens back to the earlier report that we read with the sunburns and light sensitivity for years. We're seeing this again just a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1978, in Fort Meade, Maryland, by the Defense Intelligence Agency, that's the DIA, and SRI, which we told you who that
Stanford
was.
Research.
They were called on to investigate the potential for psychic phenomena in military and domestic intelligence applications. The project and its precursors and sister projects originally went by various code names: Gondola Wish, Stargate, Grill Flame, Center Lane, Project CF, Sunstreak, Scanate, until 1991, when they were consolidated and rechristened as the Stargate Project.
Mm-hmm. And the Stargate project's work primarily involved remote viewing. The purpose and ability was to psychically see these sites. We talked about this before, but now the military's gotten involved. It's not just a research thing, you see. So that was the big change in 1978. They had existed till this time, but in 78, the military came in and said, there's something here. We need to use this. And that's kind of what they did. The project was overseen until 1987 by Lieutenant Frederick Holmes, Skip Atwaters, psychic headhunter Major General Albert Stubelin. He was later the president of the Monroe Institute. That's a big deal because that links it straight back to the Gateway Program. And the Gateway Program is basically the Monroe Institute when Monroe instigated how to actually weaponize the mind. I mean, in a way, that's what they were doing. They approached Monroe and he said, well, here's how you would do it, but you guys got to be careful because you're not really dealing with just the mind here.
And again, another thing to take into consideration here. This is Major General Albert Stubelin, who later became president of the Monroe Institute. So the way this works in military is these individuals cannot become board members or CEOs or presidents, vice presidents of other corporations or institutes until retirement. So after he retired, this Major General went on from overseeing part of a project to moving to one of the most advanced institutes of parapsychological studies. And he's set on the board as the president, not as, somebody who was just a trustee, but as president. We have a member, a high brass member of the U.S. Armed Forces, who is now president of Parapsychological Institute.
Yeah. So what's it also tell you about this guy?
Tells you that he was extremely vested, and not only just vested into the project, but he very much believed in it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And what's really great about the Stargate program, all that, everybody thinks, oh, they had all these people. No, there's only 15 to 20 of these guys.
Yeah.
15 to 20 of the most gifted psychic individuals, probably, that they could get their hands on. One of the initial recruits for the project, Joseph McGonigal, and Dr. Christopher Green. Now that's going to come in later, and that's going to be extremely important. Dr. Christopher Green, remember that name. They acted as the contract monitor for the program, McGonigal and Green. By early 1979, research at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, was integrated into the Project Grill Flame. They changed the name. This is how the name game change starts. And we already know about this. This is what Friedman had told us before about how, one project gets canceled and then another one pops up under a different name and then that gets canceled. And they're not really canceling them. They're just moving them around and shuffling names. So there's not really that much of a paper trail, or it's harder to find a paper trail.
Well, it makes it appear when you do your searches, it makes it appear that these projects were limited, that they did not succeed. Right. So they had a short lifespan and then another project starts up. But
Yep. What's 2 years, right?
Yeah. But when you talk and listen to Stan Friedman, he said that as soon as they found something that worked, everything got greenlit. But then all of a sudden, the red light came on. They were told to stop, and they were no longer working on this project. However, the very next day, you'd get a phone call saying, there's this project. It does this. We're studying this technology now. And coincidentally, you're going to be using the same project that you were working yesterday, just under this new project's name.
Yeah, yeah, and to be, his was nuclear fission and so forth. But it's a great example of how these things change names and get shuffled around, and they disappear over time.
They do.
But they didn't with this one, thankfully. So in 1983, it was redesignated INSCOM Center Lane Project, ICLP. This was in 1985. Hal Puthoff founds the Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. Puthoff formed the Advanced Theoretical Physics Working Group, ATP. Its first meeting focused on establishing a future framework of, among other things, the creation of an abductee database, as well as obtaining direct physical or psychical contact with the UFO phenomena. This is, in my opinion, this is a groundbreaking admission right here. And the fact that it has just been overlooked by a lot of researchers, it mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing, because these guys weren't playing around.
Well, the reason I think that it gets overlooked by a lot of researchers is because, just as we've spoken about every other research type out there in the past on this show, you have people who are either in Camp A or Camp B.
Yep.
There's no Camp AB. There's no Camp I don't know. Let's look around and see.
It's true.
You are yin and yang, never the combined two. And so you have people who are in the psychic contact department who are full bore psychic contact, and that these beings are only thought beings. And then you have people who are the exact opposite. These are physical flesh and blood beings. And a combination of the two is just absolutely absurd and unheard of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's just how it is. And until we get later down this list.
Yeah, right, because it changes, and you get to see it with this list, how much it has changed since then.
Yeah.
1990. By 1991, most of the contracting for the remote viewing program was transferred from SRI to the Science Application International Corporation, SAIC. Its security was altered from Special Access Program, SAP, to a limited dissemination, LIMDIS, and it was given its final name, Stargate. So the Institute for Advanced Studies is incorporated under EarthTech International, Inc. In 1991, as an innovative research facility with a high-powered creative staff dedicated to exploring the forefront research of science and engineering. That sounds okay, right?
Right. It does, until you realize this one thing.
What is that one thing that they were going to do, Joe? What is that one little thing?
But before we get to that, the importance of them incorporating under Earth Tech International is to create an umbrella.
What happens when you do that, Joe?
All of the work they now do is independent work. It's not government work. You can't look into it from a government agency any longer. They are above reproach when it comes to being asked questions by the government for details and information. So it's all shielded. It's all protected at that point. Now, what this school or institute rather was actually working on is the search for extraterrestrial visitation. It's also listed among EarthTech's current research interests. So this isn't the search for extraterrestrial life or extraterrestrial intelligence. This is SETV, the search for extraterrestrial visitation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like how they designate that very little important V at the end to make sure that it's not taken as SETI, which was also current at the same time.
It was.
right? So, SETI's out there in the public saying we're looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, whereas these guys are behind closed doors talking amongst themselves, and they're beyond that. They're now looking for extraterrestrial visitation.
Yeah.
Something has changed in the game, and we can clearly see that something has changed in the game over those decades, right? That's what we're pointing at here.
Right. The approach to interest, to investigating phenomena, to acknowledging phenomena, to now looking for extraterrestrial visitation. They're looking specifically for places and people that have been visited.
hmm So I wonder where they got the information at that said that such a thing has occurred at this point. Hmm. So in 1992, allegedly, I'll say allegedly because we don't know for sure, Gordon Novell contacted an abductee on behalf of Hal Puthoff. John B. Alexander also approached this individual. Their objective was to get DNA and recruit this individual to interact with ETs.
So why would you do that?
Wait a minute.
Why
Let's
would
think
you
about this.
why would you need that?
Well, why would you consider that?
Would it be hypothetically because they had seen a pattern?
Hmm? I mean, you mean like the pattern we showed here? That pattern?
That pattern?
That progressive pattern that, oops, we made contact with something psychically on a psychic level, and that might actually be real. Oh, what better way to get back out there? Well, let's use psychics.
But not just any psychics,
Nope.
but
Nope.
psychics who've made contact.
Bingo. So what does the CIA do when they figure out that someone's trying to figure this stuff out? Well, in 1995, the Defense Appropriation Bill directed that the program transferred from DIA to CIA oversight, Project Stargate. CIA commissioned a report. Yep. Anytime the CIA commissions a report, by the way, that usually means that there's probably some sort of cover up, or we just want to get rid of this trash because we
Yes.
don't want to get caught with our hands in this pail ever. And that's exactly what they did. They found that remote viewing had not proven to work by. I'm going to read this because this is important. They proved that remote viewing had not been proved to work by a quote psychic mechanism. Instead, it had not been used operationally. The CIA subsequently canceled and declassified the program, and it was all over the news back then. And they made fun of it, just like they did with ATIP when that came out. The same exact thing, the same ha 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 and laughing and ridicule. But what you didn't catch here was that it says they had not proved to work by a psychic mechanism. Wait
That
a minute.
only
Wait a
that
minute.
only nails down one mechanism that
But
didn't work.
but wait. Here's the thing. It didn't work by a psychic mechanism. How do they know? How did they know it didn't work by a psychic mechanism?
Because
They
it worked another way, probably.
okay. So General Vasily Alexeyev, is that him? He's a Russian. I do not know.
General Vasily Alexeyev.
Alexeyev. Alexeyev. Is that it?
Yep,
Wait, I'll get
Alexeyev.
Alexeyev.
There
There.
you go.
It
Just say it
claimed
angry and you're going to get it.
Alexeyev.
There you go.
General Alexeyev.
Meanwhile, our listeners in Russia, can you believe these
I
guys?
can't believe that. I don't think we have any listeners in Russia, but
We have it. Like, we'll have to look at that. I'm curious now.
they don't let them listen to us. What's wrong with
They
you?
probably don't.
No, we're banned in Russia, man. Claimed that the Russians observed particularly drastic increases in UFO activity whenever they were transporting, I'm going to say this, special loads. Alexeyev told journalist Valery Uvarov once the Russians had identified this pattern, they exploited it to intentionally attract the phenomena. In some cases, it would be enough to simply schedule or simulate the activity. So basically, they didn't even have to take it. They just said that they were going to, which means that something very, very intelligent was going on, right, Joe?
Yeah. It does.
Let's talk about the special loads. Let's do a little hypothetical thinking. What do you think them special loads were, my friend?
Well, these special loads could be weapons. That's my biggest, because we see the trend that follows what happens here in the United States. We also could be thinking that they're transporting their own psychic warriors.
It's one of the two. There are those who do believe that it was nukes, because that was an actual. They've asked this question multiple times to Elizondo, and he can either confirm it. Of course, he just doesn't. Nope, not talking about it. So either it's nukes, which we have already proven up to this point. They were very, very, very interested in our nuclear capabilities. They had flown over our fields. They had turned them on, turned them off, played with them like they were toys, and figured it out. And they would show up over our ships and our fleets that were armed at the time. But what you just said, we had other weapons that we just proved that we had. And in 1995, those weapons were declassified and made fun of because they didn't work, even though, according to everything that we've seen ever since, it worked.
Right.
So what are these special loads were? We're not going to say that yet. We'll let you guys make up your own mind on that. But we do know that it was one of the two. It was either A, nuclear weapons, or B, these psychic spies or psychic contact antenna of some sort, basically, right? Yeah. In 2003, 2007, Christopher Kit Green had 180 patients who had unusual medical issues following a close encounter with UAP. Green's data also consisted of personal research, which is unpublished. Doesn't have to be published. It's personal. Right. The patients that Green studied had the following several criteria. 1, they must have been affected by anomalous phenomena at very close range, which we will call near field. That's the term for that. And that's important that you remember this, near field.
Yes, near
exposure.
Field.
Number 2, their injuries must be physical in nature. Means that it's got to be something you can record. It's got to be
just
real
PTSD
data.
or some kind of mental trauma.
Right. It's got to be a scar of some sort.
Something on the body that is visible. Yep. A limp, any kind of physical ailment.
Mm-hmm. Their sighting must be corroborated by at least one additional witness. That's important because it can't be hearsay. Can't just be accounts. They are expected to grant Dr. Green full access to their entire medical history. And they must agree to a battery of tests, including DNA testing and specialized blood tests and brain scans. But the thing is, it doesn't just end there. When we say that they must agree to a battery of tests, he's talking years and years and years. He's talking decades.
And to anybody who has questionings about the access to their entire medical history, there's reasons for this. One, you're looking for the pre-existence of tumors or any kind of mass that would be in the body pre-existing prior to the exposure to one of these things. But also around this time is when the whole probing thing starts. Everybody's getting their
that's when they start talking about it, right?
Abductees and contactees talk about having surgical implants being probed, having things done to their genitals, having different all sorts of different things. And some of these individuals did have little bits of metal, little things here and there, pieces that should not be in their physiology. Now, the reason they want entire medical history is because a lot of those things they're just being re-recorded. If you got shot by a BB when, you got your little Red Ryder rifle for Christmas and you've got a BB lodged in your shin from when you were a kid and it shows up on an x-ray for 15 or 20 years, then all of a sudden you have an experience and you're like, oh, I think I got a piece of metal in my shin, because now suddenly there's scar tissue around it and it's starting to develop like a little bump and you can feel it now where you couldn't before. Then you have an x-ray done and there's a little metal bead in there. You could say, hypothetically, that without any knowledge of your prior medical records or anybody else having access to those medical records, you could say that that could have been placed in you during your encounter. However, if he has access to your full medical records, he can look back and see where you shot yourself in the leg with your Red Ryder BB gun, and in fact did not put your eye out, but gave yourself a limp for a few days.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. Yeah. And they could also be looking for certain genetic markers, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And that will come up later too. So what's really the icing on top of the cake, though, is when we find out that during the study, one of his most famous participants in the study was
Again,
Joseph.
This is a name that we have already said multiple times going back into the 60s.
Was
and that
Joseph McGonigal. The one, the only Joseph McGonigal. Now, why is this man so important, Joe? What is it with this man?
Well, the thing about McGonigal, and for those of you who are unaware of who he was one of the best remote viewers that
the
program had ever seen.
Literally.
He was the prototype. You know,
he wrote the programs from this point on. Yeah.
And he's mentioned multiple times that he'd made contact with non-humans and was even directed to remote view to Mars. We've covered that on a previous episode. If you want the 45-minute deep dive, it's back there in the psychic, I think it was psychic.
I can't remember warfare. What it's called. It might have been something like that. I'll link below and you'll know exactly what we're talking about.
Because it's one of the most interesting cases that I've ever read. And the fact that all of it...
It's a CIA document, Joe.
The fact that all of it was released just a couple years ago in this big CIA document, we were able to comb through and read the entire unredacted report that step by step mentioned McGonigal's experiences and what he was seeing. Just,
Well, one of the things...
shakes you. It shakes you up.
I will say this, because a lot of people are like, remote viewing. But here's what you need to know about how McGonigal did remote viewing and how how his protocol for remote viewing worked was you weren't told to go view Mars. You weren't told to go view the Soviet Union. You were given a sealed envelope. And in that sealed envelope, there was GPS coordinates, or there was some kind of coordinates in there, like latitude, longitude. And somehow, psychically, they go to those coordinates. He didn't know he was going to Mars. He had no idea. So in other words, what I'm saying is he didn't do that. Someone gave him those coordinates and had him do that for a specific purpose.
Now, the time was also given to him.
Right. It was because they advanced him back, if you remember.
Yeah.
Because first he's on Mars, and then he's like, oh, we want you to project back now. Where he sees, the end of this Martian civilization, and as they're going into this deep hibernation, and the ships are leaving, and anyway,
I want this in a movie. I want this in a movie.
Yeah,
so bad.
Yeah,
James Cameron, if you're listening right now, give us this. Forget Avatar 3. Give us this movie.
Yeah. So that literally, to me, for them to do that would have been around the same time that they were using these contact protocols. Yeah. We'll call them what they were. They were contact protocols. If they were actually going out and creating databases of these experiencers, these people who are having, experiences, if they were going out and following these people, again, this all kind of starts making sense. And there's that board behind me, right, with all the yarn and the pins, and now we can look at some of the things that were going on in the 90s. Some of the things, honest to God, actually happened to me that make more sense now.
Right.
The black helicopter incidents. I have detailed logs where strange helicopter activity did occur when I was experimenting with some of those out of body experience and remote viewing things back around the same time these guys were doing this, uncompletely beknownst to me. Um, if they were actually trying to create a database of experiencers, how many people were in those databases if that actually happened? What were they, what were they looking for? My theory is with me, they were just like, oh, he's too nuts. We're not going to even recruit him for the program. Just forget, back off. You know, maybe they didn't want to be exposed. That could also be the thing because I've always been the one to try to expose this stuff. The only thing that scared me off of it was the way that I saw it going. And I'm like, I don't like this. It interferes with my belief system. And so I backed away. And then I learned to integrate that. And now here we are. And, this is just the strangest, craziest trip. But the thing is, man, if they were really creating a database of people back then,
yeah,
that would have made perfect
and that was
sense.
That was one of the things that you've had that conversation with me
Yep.
multiple times over the last 14 years.
Yep. Yeah, man. I mean, I've got logbooks here with the actual date when those happened. So
yeah,
I used to have them on VHS, but they probably don't play anymore. But I actually managed to get out there, and one time the choppers were flying over, and I got them on video. I even asked a buddy of mine, what's this thing doing? He's like, I don't know, no idea, because they were flying like super low. It happened multiple times, but then it just stopped, of course, after a while. But man, I tell you, it makes you really think, because that, me aside, think about all the people who were having the black helicopter incidents all out west,
yeah.
the cattle mutilations, things like that. We'll go into that next episode, but let's stick into this right now, and come back to our timeline, because now it's 2008.
2008 to 2010.
Yeah. And this was the ALSAP thing again. This, by the way, ALSAP was initiated by Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, for those who do not know. It was the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. It was to study the unexplained aerial phenomena. This
UAP,
is the one. Yep.
This is when UAP became a term that was being tossed around at the time in the government. We had not yet, as the public, heard this term. Everybody's still using UFO. It wasn't until I think probably 5 or 6 months prior to Hillary Clinton's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel's late night show that the UAP thing was publicly mentioned on a open air kind of environment. And prior to that, the only person who had mentioned it that was in the public eye would have been Nick Pope.
Well, they used it a couple of times, but again, most people didn't like the term.
Yeah.
It became a term, I guess, after that famous New York Times article. That's what really sealed it down for everyone. We all still use UFO here, but sometimes it is a UAP, isn't it? Because
it is, but we have classifications for that.
Yes, we do.
We have object classifications, and then we have phenomena. The phenomena is different than an object.
It absolutely is
a physical craft that you can see. Remember, we go back to Team A and Team B.
Yeah.
And then we're team maybe both.
We have to be. We are the ones who have to walk in the middle and look on both sides of this phenomena, because there's a bridge there. You've got to be on the bridge. If you're not on the bridge, you're in the water.
You're missing a ton of information.
You're missing it. Yeah, exactly. Because the data is there, and that's kind of what we're trying to show here. We don't know who's right or who's wrong, but we do see a clear pattern that has formed here. That was a $22 million investment, by the way. That was Defense Intelligence Agency who did that. It was in 2007 when it was budgeted. It was budgeted for 5 years. It was terminated midway through. So the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which you now know as ATIP, which took center stage. That's the one that took center stage. That replaced it.
So it changed from Weapons Systems Application Program to
what?
Threat Identification Program. Those are two vastly different.
Yeah, let's talk about this vastly different terminologies, because that is important. And another thing, again, that has been just completely overlooked. Just, these names, these acronyms. It's like if people just say them, they don't think about what it means. But why did we go to an advanced aerospace, weapons system application program? Why did we go to that? Why did we go from that to
which for anybody who's listening who's not prior service,
yeah,
a weapon systems application program is a project that is designing weapons for advanced aerospace. So very, very super high tech things that fly in the sky, weapon systems.
There you go. That's a good way to put it.
Now, looking at this, it changed from developing weapons to targeting threats, identification of threats.
Yeah, it's in the name.
Yep.
And yet, this is still in the 2008, 2010. UFOs are not a threat to national security. It's still thrown out there every time.
And not just not a threat. UFOs are scoffed and laughed at.
Yes,
every
absolutely.
President who's been brought in for the last 20 years, it's one of the first questions that they're asked in their first few days in office, and their very first handful of interviews is, what is their stance on UFOs? It's been this way since Bill Clinton.
Been that way since Bill. Dude, it was that way since Jimmy Carter.
Well, yeah, Jimmy Carter was
had
first,
side.
but like Bush didn't even talk about it. Bush he was former CIA. He just glossed it and went on. Yep. But Carter entertained it.
Clinton
entertained
Reagan
it.
had a sighting as well.
Reagan did.
So,
and Clinton entertained the question and made a laughing joke of the question. Then did it again. Then you've got Bush Jr. He laughed and joked at the question. And
not gonna do it. Not
gonna do it.
Not gonna do it.
then you've got Obama was asked the question, and
I thought Obama's response was very interesting, though.
His first response was laughter.
It was. But
second response was totally different after
serious.
After re-election.
Yep, very serious.
Totally different ballgame.
Yeah. So I suggest people go back and watch that as well, because you do see a clear change in how they were answering these questions at this time. Things were changing. That's what we're getting at. There's this massive change. The tides are turning. It's
well, you got to think, when was the re-election?
That's a good point.
Just after ATIP was formed.
That is a good point. That is a very good
point. We
point.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
But the re-election took place 2 years after ATIP was born.
Yeah, man. So you got this stuff it just gets weirder. It really does. So that takes us to 2012.
Right.
And man, I love that year. That was a great year. I remember December 21st, 2012.
We had the Mayan calendar to look forward to, and then that didn't happen.
Or did it?
Maybe.
Did it?
Possibility. Looking at how things are going now, who knows?
Things definitely changed. So here we go again.
We have another familiar name popping up.
A very familiar, two familiar names.
Two familiar names.
Christopher Green joins forces with Garry P. Nolan.
Which again, Dr. Nolan was the immunologist at Stanford. These two have now joined up and kind of connected. And Dr. Nolan and Green begin to collaborate to begin to zero in on anatomically coherent location in the brains of Green's patients, which exhibited unusual structural features. Some of these patients were world-class remote viewers like Uri Geller. That name's going to make some ears perk up. Another one is Ingo Swann. This is another name that everybody should know. And Pat Price. Green concluded that such individuals were abnormal. He reached his conclusion after having looked at their blood tests, their genetic tests, as well as their IQ and their neurological tests, as well as cardiovascular, which has a lot.
Yeah, he did everything with these guys. He literally had this, from what I understand, he had this technique That's why he was brought into this project.
Yeah.
Because he literally said that in there's one of his applications, it's a patent that he has. He could take a drop of your blood and literally look through, and he believed that every event in your life was recorded in your DNA, and they could read that from the blood, like every single thing that happened to you, every trauma, every event. And that is why they brought him into that program.
And what's really interesting, some of you who are listening to this that might not follow this kind of particular phenomena much, just heard something that sounds eerily reminiscent of one of the biggest video game franchises on the planet. It's the Assassin's Creed franchise. That a single drop of your DNA recorded all of your history and your ancestral history. Just saying.
Just saying.
Sounds like somebody heard something.
You never know, assimilation. So Green and Nolan try to identify this gene, which correlates with anomalous experiences. Okay. So basically, they're saying that this gene is correlating with these encounters or whatever they are that's happened to these people. Green refers to this area of research as genomics of supernormality. I think Professor X would call it the X gene.
That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like these individuals had a specific gene that set them aside from the rest of the general public.
Mm-hmm. At first, they assumed that they were dealing with some sort of brain injury in these people, but further MRI analysis it identified that the anomalies represented a non-pathological neural feature. What they had discovered was an enhanced bilateral white matter connectivity between the two parts of the brain, known as the caudata and the putamen. You know, they were definitely different than the database of their control subjects.
Right.
So they did prove that this was a repeatable thing, by the way. So these, not just one or two people, they're talking about hundreds of people, by the way. This is how big this thing was. So out of 100 MRIs from a standard hospital database, none of the individuals in their control group exhibited any of this unusual caudata putamen fusion, as we shall call it, or enhancement. By contrast, in their own unique clinical cohorts, the people that they brought in, approximately 50 to 60% did. In all to varying degrees, they had an enhancement. In other words, they were way beyond statistical probability. Guess who their cohorts included, Joe?
I'm going to guess that it's somebody we've already talked about on this list.
Well, it was a few of them. Their individuals, their own cohorts included several brilliant remote viewers. They had hyperconnectivity in spades. In fact, they were on the upper end of the curve. Nolan told M.J. Baines, this was in another article, the observation of the white matter density is especially overdeveloped in remote viewers. It makes it logical to ask whether these features are somehow related to anomalous cognition, and if so, how? So what are we getting at here, bud? I mean, we might have just lost a couple people. It might have just went over their heads, but why don't you try to sum that up? Because I know what it means.
What getting here is that these studies have found that there is a significant increase in white matter density, which is the connective tissue of the brain, and it's overdeveloped, meaning that it is beyond the norm of individuals, but it's not pathologic. It's not damaging. It's not causing any kind of brain damage, any kind of memory loss, anything like that. It's acting as an enhancement. And that somehow what is taking place within the connectivity of the brain and the connective tissue of the brain and the abundance of that connective tissue is somehow related to having the abilities to receive these psychic images.
That is the best way to put it. So they become an antenna. They are capable of sensing things better. We hear this a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
with certain psychical individuals who have been, switched on, so to speak, you know.
Yep.
And so far, Nolan and Green have seen no indication that the level of connectivity between the cadet outputman change over time. In other words, once it's done, it's on, it's there. It does not revert back to normal or whatever normal was. Now, whether an event is necessary in order to turn it on, the function of this trade is another question. A Kundalini type event or even traumatic brain injury, they questioned. Nolan speculates that maybe regeneration in that area of the brain after a traumatic event opens new pathways, which activates it to extraordinary potential. This is important because we see these enhanced psychic abilities, possible contact type experiences in individuals who have had near death experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, is it just me? Am I being paranoid here? Am I reading too much into this? But are we seeing this much of a pattern that kind of is showing that there's a little bit more to this stuff?
Well, it's not just even with NDEs.
Yeah,
a Kundalini like event. Yeah. What they're mentioning there is a spiritual awakening.
Yeah, exactly. And we already know that a lot of the Eastern methodologies, that's just as normal can be.
Right. Right. I mean, akin. Let's put it into perspective for some of the folks who are of Western culture. Pentecostal folks have a spiritual awakening. They call it the baptism of fire, or being baptized in the Holy Ghost, and then they speak in tongues and have this spiritual awakening. It's the same kind of general phenomena that we're talking about here. Another thing that would be like two football players smacking helmets together. One gets a brain injury that results in an overdevelopment of this white connective tissue. Suddenly now they have these open neural pathways, these new neural pathways that now give them these extraordinary potential, just like was mentioned in the article, to be able to receive or export this form of data.
Mm-hmm. And that is kind of what we're talking about, right? We're talking about reception and export of data. And this is kind of familiar because this is kind of how the modus operandi operates with the contact experience that some of these guys used to tell in their stories. The ones that everyone says that they made up. Fantastic that they made it up, and it's so accurate. But anyway, Likotsky, Kellner, and Knapp, who wrote Skinwalkers at Pentagon, they said that decades of field research by ALSAP, BASS, NIDS, that's the National Institute of Discovery Sciences, I believe, and multiple other organizations had suggested that consciousness, including telepathic communication, may play an integral role in human UAP interactions. So here we have it again. ALSAP was very, very interested and believed that you could communicate with this non-human intelligence, as they were trying to do, the UAP interaction. They also indicated that ALSAP and BASS was successful. This is important. They were successful in making contact by deploying, quote, especially adaptive people as human interactive agents to UFO hotspots. It seems reasonable to assume that some of these interactive agents were selected because of their well-developed contact antenna, that's in quotes. It's exactly what we had said earlier.
Yeah.
Literally. So what we are proposing here basically is what you had just said. We take an enhanced individual, special load, special payload, put that special payload into an area and sit back and wait. And if we have a special load that can interact even better, like say a remote viewer, well, we might be getting two-way communications. I mean, we're talking close encounters of the, third, fourth, fifth, sixth kind here. We're talking about Some really big things is what I'm saying. We're having back and
Yeah.
forward communication. I won't say six kind because that's something else we're going to get into here in a second. So that'd be CE5. I'm sorry, CE4, CE5, because we would be going and communicating. So, and that's kind of what they were doing. So fast forward back 2017. You know what happened in 2017? The world went
Yep.
crazy because they found
Everybody
out that
knows.
now they're real. UAPs are here. This is it. Everyone's blah blah blah. Right? Okay. I'm not even going to go into that because it's just a matter of so much history at this point.
Well, yeah, we've already covered it multiple times. You can just go back and listen to all those episodes.
We've covered it. Discovery's covered
We're not going to
it.
stop you.
We're not going to. Yeah, go. So, but in 2018, this we didn't cover. In 2018, one of the most disturbing aspects of Christopher Green. This is Kit Green, by the way. You're going to hear a lot from Kit. I think in the next, probably in the next year. I think we're going to hear a lot from Nolan and from Kit. I really do. And one of the most disturbing aspects of Green's experiencer study, sorry, was an experiment, but his experiencer study is the fact that 25% of the individuals in his test group within 5 to 7 years had died.
Wow.
Yeah, that's 25% mortality rate of receiving their diagnosis. And basically, whatever happened to them, like if they got that sunburn, what we were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
So on August 8th, 2018, Jay from the Mind Sublime, this was a site.
Twitter.
It's a Twitter. Account. It's a Twitter account. So he has something over there in Twitter, and he posted an image that he had found on EarthTech's website. Remember EarthTech?
Yep.
Remember what their main goal or one of their main goals was? One of their main goals was to make contact, right?
Yeah. And the image that was shared purports to show a brain scan of an individual who passed away shortly after near field exposure.
There's that word.
Unidentified aerial craft at 500 meters.
That's important.
500 meters is freaking far away, and that is considered near field exposure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
500 meters.
500 meters. So
that's 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
Roughly.
And let's go really quick, try to explain what that means. Near field is, okay, so we take a radio, a transmitter. And here's the transmitter. Got the transmitter right here, right? Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So here's a transmitter. If we're standing about here, this is the near field. Okay. So this is it's going to be pretty hard right here. Microwave radiation at this point is going to be pretty hard, is what I'm saying. This is why, if you go and you do a tour, say at one of the big radar installations or something, they'll tell you about how, birds get fried as they fly into the beam of the radar. This is a common thing. It happens all the time, by the way. That's because it's really strong right here. Now, as it goes out, it dissipates out. It's still detectable, very detectable and very strong out here. This is the far field. It's detectable at far field, but it's nowhere near as lethal as it is in the near field range.
Right.
So here we're cooking the potato. Okay, back to that analogy. Cook the potato, move it out, and the potato doesn't get cooked anymore. You see? So that's kind of what's happening with this exposure, if that makes any sense to you.
Well, the brain scan, which we will post here, you can see masses in the brain and scarring. Both masses and scarring in the brain tissue.
Yep.
And the patient, this image was taken 1 month after near field exposure. The patient died 2 weeks later.
EarthTech also removed that, by the way. Okay, so January 16th is where we end up at, and that is the DIA releases a list of 38 research titles pursued by the program in response to a Freedom of Information Act requested by Stephen Aftergood.
Stephen Aftergood.
Yeah, Stephen Aftergood, a director of the Federation of American Scientists. Project on Government Secrecy. One of these topics, which made the news, by the way, and it made moves in a way that people were just making fun of it, was
it did
traversable wormholes, stargates, and negative energy. And that was led by Eric W. Davis of
EarthTech International, baby. Here we are again.
Was founded by
Harold Putoff,
Man,
and he was formerly
involved with what?
Project Stargate.
See how this all comes back around?
See, we're just lining the dots up for you guys. We're this is all the information. This isn't like
this is in
we're not
chronological
cherry
order
picking
too.
information either.
No, this is in chronological order.
Chronological order. So after that, in 2019, the USS Kidd and the USS Russell incident occurs.
Yep.
We've covered this in other episodes, but to give you guys a brief, it was basically released out to us in 2021.
Yes, it was. Yes.
And Jeremy Corbell posted the 40-second long clip to Twitter saying it was taken from the USS Omaha on July 15th, 2019. The Pentagon has admitted that the U.S. Navy destroyer captured this eerie night vision footage of a mysterious flashing objects flying above it and another warship.
Now, these are today known as drones, right?
These are today, that's what they're calling them, as drones. If you see those mentioned on the news and they're throwing the drone tag out there, if you watch the video, it is not a drone. The green tinged video was gathered by the UAP task force and leaked to filmmaker Jeremy Corbell, who made the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers,
which brought him back into the forefront after being away for so long.
And KLAS TV news director George Knapp. So George Knapp, who is a name that we mentioned earlier, for having
Ken Walker's at the Pentagon as well.
Exactly. He's also the guy who broke the Bob Lazar story to begin with.
Yep.
And now we've got Jeremy Corbell, who is given the footage by the UAP task force. Like, it was leaked to him. It was gathered up by the UAP task force, and someone within the UAP task force leaked it to Corbell, who then released it to the world.
Yep.
Corbell said he verified the startling video's authenticity after gaining information from an intelligence briefing at the Pentagon, where officials confirmed the footage was shot by the Navy but did not describe its contents. Corbell also shared 3 images captured by the USS Omaha of an unidentified spherical craft. It's noted that the spherical craft was suspect to be a trans-medium vehicle. Note that term. You're going to be seeing this occur over and over in the future, especially in the next portion of this show. So, it was suspected to be a trans-medium vehicle and was observed descending into the water without destruction. Corbell said, according to the news outlet, that this is what was given to him, and it was a transmedium vehicle. So, transmedium vehicle. What a transmedium vehicle is an object or vehicle that can transverse multiple mediums being air, space, or water, or land even, for that matter. These objects were seen moving from land to water without disturbance of the water's surface or destruction of the craft. That means that it's bending physics at its whim.
Yeah, that's exactly what that means. Yeah.
Now, the logs from the warships USS Kidd and the Rafael Paraletta and USS John Finn over several days were also received and revealed flying objects buzzing them off the coast of California.
Yep.
For several days.
Yep.
Guys, several days.
No, we've all heard this in the news, Joe. This doesn't seem like, oh, well, why do you guys keep talking about this thing? This has already happened. It's not that important. Yeah, it is. It's important because
we said on this, if I remember correctly, we said on this in the news on this segment of an episode that we did for almost half an hour.
It is very significant. Important. It still is, because we have to look at it for what it is and when it occurred. Now, knowing what we know, now it makes sense. Now it fits into it's the missing puzzle pieces to this. You see, all these things go together. Like, it'll all make sense by episode 3, I promise. And yes, it's going to take at least 3 episodes to get through this, guys. No lie.
So in 2020, the Pentagon acknowledged the existence of a program similar to ATIP. which was called the UAP Task Force, United Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. This is who allegedly gathered up and leaked this video to Corbell, for example. The unclassified but previously unacknowledged program was made public during a June 2020 hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. The program is being given classified briefings to congressional committees and aerospace executives for over a decade. Former Senator Harry Reid stated in reference to the successor program, it's extremely important that information about the discovery of physical materials or retrieved craft come out.
What?
Retrieved craft. Physical materials and retrieved craft. It is extremely important. This is a United States senator who apparently knows something.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, Joe,
it is extremely important that information about the discovery, which means possession of, the finding and possession of physical materials or retrieved craft, come out.
And if you recall, this was the first big meeting, but we weren't privy to it. The senators got it. And that's what made the Senate eventually say, we got to get this out to the public, because they didn't think some of this stuff should be kept in the classified realm. And that's where we are today. But during a recent podcast appearance, Luis Elizondo stated in his work. Now, this is important because Luis is always talking about those 5 observables. Anybody who watched the show Unidentified knows the 5 observables, right? Sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability of the craft, transmedium travel, positive lift. That means lift without any visible means of propulsion. But this is the one that got this whole thing going. In a 2020 interview with the New Republic, Luis Elizondo revealed that there was another observable, which they were more reluctant to discuss. It was the 6th observable, and it referred to a biological effect, such as morphological changes to the body and brain. Now, we heard him say this in 2020, but
we did.
There wasn't anything. We didn't have the rest of the puzzle like we now have the rest of the puzzle. What he's referring to here is the work by Kit Green and Garry Nolan. Next week, we're going to go really in depth on that work, and we're going to explain to you why, when you're out there and you see one of these orbs, you might not want to run up to it. It might not be a good idea.
Just saying.
It may not be a good idea. I don't think it would be a good idea, and I don't think we're going to do it. We're also going to be running out there in the field with detectors, just for our own well-being and our own sense of security. Don't care what anyone else does. That's us. That's what we're going to be doing from this point on. That's how we're going to roll. Because when you hear the rest of this, you might want to think about that yourself.
So, guys, we know that this is a heavy, heavy episode. Next week is going to be the same thing, but you are being given raw data. You can make up your own mind about this. Please share your thoughts down in the comments below. Email us at wildandweirdwv@gmail.com. Share your thoughts with us. If you're just one of our audio listeners only, shoot us an email. Let us know what you're thinking. We want to hear your thoughts on this, because this is a very interesting subject, and there's a lot of people who have...
Very interesting. It's very important. It's very widespread, Joe.
It is.
And it's time to talk about it. So, yes, if you've had any experiences like this, contact us. We want to hear it.
We do want to hear it.
We're not
We'd like
creating
to
a
get your
database.
story. We'd like to possibly talk with you.
Yeah.
Collect some data from you.
Not blood samples.
Not blood samples.
No.
But maybe blood samples. But guys, thanks for listening. If you're listening to us over on YouTube, remember to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you're following us on the audio side of our podcast, guys, we really appreciate every one of you all. Tell your friends about the show. Let them know what we're covering right now, because this is something that is going to pique a lot of people's interests, okay? So until next time, stay wild and weird, because good grief, it's hard not to at this point.